What a taste is the Pinterest, because they are the best.
Yeah, stop using illegitimate reasons.
Which takes us on. So the opposite of legitimate is illegitimate.
Illegitimate.
That has a slightly different kind of meaning.
It does. I mean, the most common use of the word illegitimate is used to describe a child whose father is not officially recognised. Often the name of the father isn't on the birth certificate. This means the child often doesn't have the same legal rights as a child whose father is recognised. It's slightly old-fashioned use. You don't hear it so much in the UK, at least in these terms, but that's the most common use of the word illegitimate.
And our next headline and next word.
We have in the Telegraph, Donald Trump purges Obama appointees and lashes out at critics ahead of inauguration. And in the story, it's telling us that the boycott would swell as a result.
Swell, meaning get bigger. The protests will get bigger. They're expecting more than 26 members of Congress from the Democratic Party to boycott this event.
Yeah.
But swell has a number of meanings.
It does, yes. I mean, it can mean in numbers of people or quantities, more and more and more of something. It also means that if you're late again, Neil, and you make me feel angry, I might get a big stick and hit you on the head with it.
Hit me on the head or nose.
Or nose, yes, I'll punch you in the nose.
Yeah, thank you. What would be the likely result of that?
Your nose or your head would swell. It would get bigger as a result of an injury. And we often use the word swell to describe this physical reaction to an injury. The noun is swelling. You would have a swelling on your head. It's often used to mean to do with liquid. So we can talk about water, the ocean swelling. And we can sometimes use it in a positive sense, in a metaphorical sense.
So, for example, if you were proud, you were watching your child performing on the stage or something like that.
Yes, the little angels singing beautifully.
You could say,
my heart would swell with pride.
Let us recap the words that we've looked at today, but before that we have, as usual, our Facebook challenge. The big word that we've been looking at is inauguration, the inauguration of Donald Trump as US President. Quite a difficult word to say, even for a native speaker like me.
Yes, I've been saying it all morning and I still have to think about it. Inauguration.
Inauguration. So our question was, how many syllables are there in this word, inauguration? Inauguration. How many were there?
Well, we look on Facebook, quite a few people thought it was 4, but in fact there are 5 syllables. Inauguration. So well done to everyone who said answer C, including Dilan Turk, Cody Liu and Alex May. Well done everybody who got that right. 5 syllables in inauguration.
Great stuff. So now if you could just recap the words we've looked at today, please.
I can. We had boycott, which means refuse to take part in something as a protest. Legitimate means allowed by the law. And swell means get bigger.
And if you would like to test yourself on today's vocabulary, there's a quiz you can take on our website at bbclearningenglish.com, where you can find all kinds of other videos and materials to help you improve your English. Thanks for joining us and goodbye.
Goodbye.
News review from BBC Learning English.
What a taste is the Pinterest. Oh, no. Because they are the best.
BBC Learning English. To find out more, visit our website.
Hello, I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. You're watching Lingo Hack from BBC Learning English. Today's news stories are:
Researchers develop lip-reading machine. More women in the UK working into their 70s. Italian woman first to manage male football team.
Here are the words and phrases for you to learn.
Underway. Stands out. Making history.
Let's hear more about today's news stories.
In Oxford, research is underway to teach computers the difficult art of lip reading.
Underway. Underway. In progress.
In Oxford, research is underway to teach computers the difficult art of lip reading. It's involved training an artificial intelligence system using thousands of hours of BBC News programmes. Right now, the technology only works on full sentences in recorded clips. The next stage is to make it work live.
The proportion of women who don't stop working until past 70 has grown from 1 in 20 4 years ago to more than 1 in 10 last year. It's doubled.
There are still more men than women working into their 70s, but what stands out is the dramatic increase in the number of women.
Stands out. Stands out is very noticeable.
The proportion of women who don't stop working until past 70 has grown from 1 in 20 4 years ago to more than 1 in 10 last year. It's doubled.
There are still more men than women working into their 70s, but what stands out is the dramatic increase in the number of women, and at least part of the reason for that is money.
Italy's Patrizia Panico is making history this week.
Making history. Making history. Doing something never done before that people will remember.
Italy's Patrizia Panico is making history this week. She's the first woman football coach of a male Italian side. She's leading Italy's under-16 team in 2 friendlies against Germany. At 42, she's a retired footballer herself. She scored 110 goals for Italy in over 200 matches. Patrizia Panico hopes that her career inspires other women.
That's all from Lingo Hack for today.
This is a download from B.
Flick to link, a link to flick.
So have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a place with no rules? That sounds pretty cool. You wake up one morning, however, and you discover that the reason there are no rules is because there's no government. And there are no laws. In fact, all social institutions have disappeared. So there's no schools, there's no hospitals, there's no police, there's no banks. There's no athletic clubs. There's no utilities. Well, I know a little bit about what this is like. Because when I was a medical student in 1999, I worked in a refugee camp in the Balkans during the Kosovo War. And when the war was over, I got permission, unbelievably, from my medical school to take some time off and follow some of the families that I had befriended in the camp back to their village in Kosovo and understand how they navigated life in this post-war setting. So, post-war Kosovo was a very interesting place because NATO troops were there, mostly to make sure that the war didn't break out again. But other than that, it was actually a lawless place. And almost every social institution, both public and private, had been destroyed. So, I can tell you that when you go into one of these situations and settings, it is absolutely thrilling for about 30 minutes, because that's about how long it takes before you run into a situation where you realize how incredibly vulnerable you are. For me, that moment came when I had to cross the first checkpoint. And I realized as I drove up that I would be negotiating passage through this checkpoint with a heavily armed individual who, if he decided to shoot me right then and there, he actually wouldn't be doing anything illegal. But the sense of vulnerability that I had was absolutely nothing in comparison to the vulnerability of the families that I got to know over that year. You see, life in a society where there are no social institutions is riddled with danger and uncertainty. And simple questions like, what are we going to eat tonight, are very complicated to answer. Questions about security, when you don't have any security systems, are terrifying. It's that altercation I had with that neighbor down the block going to turn into a violent episode that will end my life or my family's life?
Health concerns, when there is no health system, are also terrifying. I listened as many families had to sort through questions like, my infant has a fever. What am I going to do? My sister who is pregnant is bleeding. What should I do? Who should I turn to? Where are the doctors? Where are the nurses? If I could find one, are they trustworthy? How will I pay them? In what currency will I pay them? If I need medications, where will I find them? If I take those medications, are they actually counterfeits? And on and on. So life in these settings, the dominant theme, the dominant feature of life, is the incredible vulnerability that people have to manage day in and day out because of the lack of social systems. And it actually turns out that this feature of life is incredibly difficult to explain and be understood by people who are living outside of it. So I discovered this. When I left Kosovo, I came back to Boston. I became a physician. I became a global public health policy researcher. I joined the Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital Division of Global Health. And I, as a researcher, really wanted to get started on this problem right away. I was like, how do we reduce the crushing vulnerability of people living in these types of fragile settings? Is there any way that we can start to think about how to protect and quickly recover the institutions that are critical to survival, like the health system? And I have to say, I have amazing colleagues, okay? But one interesting thing about it was that this was sort of an unusual question for them. They were kind of like, if you work in war, doesn't that mean you work on refugee camps and you work on documenting mass atrocities, which is, by the way, very, very, very important. So it took me a while to explain why I was so passionate about this issue until about 6 years ago. And that's when this landmark study that looked at and described the public health consequences of war was published. And they came to an incredible, provocative conclusion. These researchers concluded that the vast majority of death and disability from war happens after the cessation of conflict. So the most dangerous time to be a person living in a conflict-affected state is after the cessation of hostilities. It's after the peace deal has been signed. It's when that political solution has been achieved. That seems so puzzling, but of course it's not. Because war kills people by robbing them of their clinics, of their hospitals, of their supply chains. Their doctors are targeted, are killed, are on the run, and more invisible and yet more deadly is the destruction of the health governance institutions and their finances. So this is really not surprising at all to me. But what is surprising and somewhat dismaying is how little impact this insight has had in terms of how we think about human suffering in war. Let me give you a couple examples. Last year, you may remember that Ebola hit the West African country of Liberia. And there was a lot of reporting about this group, Doctors Without Borders, sounding the alarm and calling for aid and assistance. But not a lot of that reporting answered the question, why is Doctors Without Borders even in Liberia? Doctors Without Borders is an amazing organization dedicated and designed to providing emergency care in war zones. Liberia's civil war had ended in 2003. That was 11 years before Ebola even struck. When Ebola struck Liberia, there were less than 50 doctors in the entire country of 4.5 million people. Doctors Without Borders is in Liberia because Liberia still doesn't really have a functioning health system 11 years later. When the earthquake hit Haiti in 2010, the outpouring of international aid was phenomenal. But did you know that only 2% of that funding went to rebuild Haitian public institutions, including its health sector? From that perspective, Haitians continue to die from the earthquake even today. I recently met this gentleman. This is Dr. Nazir Ismet. He's the Minister of Health in the Northern Autonomous Region of Iraq in Kurdistan. Here he is announcing that in the last 9 months, his country, his region, has increased from 4 million people to 5 million people. That's a 25% increase. Thousands of these new arrivals have experienced incredible trauma. His doctors are working 16-hour days without pay. His budget has not increased by 25%. It has decreased by 20% as funding has flowed to security concerns and to short-term relief efforts. When his health sector fails, and if history is any guide, it will, how do you think that's going to influence the decision-making of the 5 million people in his region as they think about whether they should flee that type of vulnerable living situation? So, as you can see, this is a frustrating topic for me, and I've really tried to understand why the reluctance to protect and support indigenous health systems and security systems. And I usually tier 2.
My photo tape.